Welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be my TTC and 2-week wait. So, as to be expected, given the topic, it's going to be a little TMI, especially if you're a family member of mine. So, you've been given a heads up. Proceed at your own risk. So let's start with the TTC. We tried for 2 cycles, and the first cycle we did tracking my basal body temperature and LH surges. I had been tracking my basal body temperature using an app. I believe it's Natural Cycles. I've been using that for about 6 months at the time already. For preventing pregnancy, so I kind of had a general idea of when I was ovulating already, and I think I had used some ovulation strips a few times, but nothing in depth because the app seemed to be working fine for predicting my ovulation. And so when we decided to start trying, I purchased some LH strips, like cheapy ones from Amazon, and started using them more and like on a more consistent basis and doing a little bit more research about them before. And I also was taking a prenatal. I was taking the Garden of Life gummy prenatal. And I was somewhat tracking my cervical mucus, not like super in depth. I had just done a little bit of research, and so it was just kind of something that, and it has always been something that I've just kind of noticed a little bit in the back of my mind, like when I go to the bathroom and stuff. So yeah, I was tracking it to some extent, but not in depth. And then I also had purchased this Fertility Tea. So I was drinking that, I think, every night, maybe every other night, something like that. And so for the second cycle, what was different was that I actually stopped taking that tea. I did some research, and because the cycle that I, like my period that I had after the first cycle just seemed a little different than what I was used to, and it just kind of got me thinking, I wonder if it had anything to do with the tea. So I did some more research on it, and apparently I saw some reviews. If you already have a normal cycle, which I pretty much did, then it can actually mess with your cycle. So I was a little concerned that maybe I shouldn't be drinking the tea. I just thought it was going to be like something supportive, not something that I needed to or possibly needed to be drinking if my cycle was not regular. So I stopped drinking the tea. We also got a supplement, like a vitamin supplement for my husband to take that's specific for fertility. All of this stuff that I talk about, I'll try and leave links below for all of them. And I was also still tracking the basal body temperature and LH, using the LH strips, but this time when I was tracking my LH surges, I used both the cheapies and the clear blue ones and kind of compared them to each other just to see if there were any discrepancies. Also looked more into tracking my LH surges, which I found out that it's better to take the, like to use the test twice a day in case you miss the window, because if you're only testing once a day, you might have already, like, the peak might have already happened and you might have already started to like come down from it. So yeah, I didn't want to miss that. And actually I did notice some things, so I'll get to that in a minute. And then I was checking my cervical mucus more regularly and doing a little bit more research on that to look for more specifically what I wanted to, like, what you want to look for. And so one thing that I noticed was that I ovulated. Oh, you know what? Let me mention one more thing that was different. I also did acupuncture, which I did twice during the cycle, like before I actually got pregnant. Pregnant. Acupuncture during the second cycle. That was another difference between the first and second cycles. So I did acupuncture and then I ovulated the next day. And then I think it was a few days later, I went back again to for another acupuncture appointment, and I had read that acupuncture can also help support implantation, so that was my goal for going back a second time. So one thing that I noticed is that I ovulated earlier that cycle, not by a lot. I think it was like 1 or 2 days early, which isn't an issue. Like 1 or 2 days is not a negative sign. It's once you start to get to be more than that, then it can mean different things about hormone levels and I think maybe some other things. But I think knowing, like being able to know that because of using the ovulation strips and like comparing the two brands and just like knowing more about what I needed to do with the LH strips and like testing twice a day, that could have been a difference between the first and second cycles, like being able to pinpoint more when I ovulated. And also I kind of think that the acupuncture helped me ovulate, possibly, like kind of open things up, so to speak. I won't go into more like detail or try to speak on what acupuncture can do for, or potentially do for, fertility. I'll let you research that on your own because I don't want to misspeak on anything. It certainly wasn't something that I was expecting to, be the one thing that worked to have us successfully get pregnant, but I certainly knew it wasn't going to hurt. So yeah, that was one of my main reasons for going. And then I took a probiotic specific for women's health, and I think that helped support my cervical mucus because I definitely felt like it was more obvious that I had what some refer to as like egg white cervical mucus, or like the holy grail of cervical mucus. I mean, probiotics are good for, reproductive health in general, but they are supposed to help with cervical mucus, and it's supposed to help prevent like yeast infections and that sort of thing. So that could have been a difference between the first and second cycle because I was also taking a probiotic. And I was trying to eat foods that support fertility, which I'll maybe try and leave or like put something on the screen with some of the foods, but If you do a Google search, or there's also this YouTuber that I follow called Fertility Homeopath, and she has a lot of videos about foods and supplements that support fertility. So I got a lot of my information from her, so I highly recommend checking out her channel. And speaking of her channel, there was also a homeopathic supplement called Kelp Flor that she recommends to support implantation, which was another supplement that I was taking. It's supposed to I think help with the lining of your uterus and kind of make it more like a thicker lining and just better support for the embryo to be able to attach. You can also, she has some videos about that, I think, but she also has a website where she talks more specifically about that supplement, so I'll link all that stuff below. Okay, so I saved this for last because I really don't think it was necessarily a factor, but I feel like it didn't hurt, and it was also a difference between the first and second cycles. The position that we did it in was doggy style, like each time we baby danced, as they say in the TTC community, if you're not familiar. So, and there's mixed research out there about whether or not it actually does anything. I think, in my personal opinion, it maybe just helps, but doing other positions don't make it impossible by any means. So, but I just thought I'd mention it because it was a difference. So, between the first and second cycles. So, yeah, that was our TTC journey. And now for my 2-week wait symptoms. I know that every person is different and every person experiences the 2-week wait symptoms differently, even with different pregnancies. Like the 2-week wait symptoms for one of your pregnancies might be completely different than your 2-week wait symptoms for another pregnancy. So it's not always, like, all the symptoms are not always indicative of a sign that you're pregnant, but I know it's something that we like to research anyway, and people just want to know, and whether or not it's helpful or just as an FYI or just as a means of entertainment. It's totally up to you, but I had definitely watched my fair share of 2-week wait symptoms, so I figured I would share mine as well. And I will say that it's interesting because with the first cycle, I convinced myself that I was experiencing symptoms, but I don't think that, obviously, I wasn't, and I think looking back on it, I read into some of the symptoms because I was just so convinced that we had done everything right and everything had lined up, and I got my hopes up so much that, and because my cycle was so regular, I know that it is and can be a struggle. I was just, I don't know, I think so hopeful and excited that it worked that I was convincing myself of symptoms during the first one, which definitely affected how I felt about my symptoms during the second cycle, because I tried not to read into anything during my second cycle. because I didn't want to set myself up for disappointment. So I will preface it with that. So I wrote sore nipples immediately, which I do remember that. I think I thought that I had sore nipples during the first cycle, but to be honest, I think they were maybe just like a little bit tender, which was probably typical with premenstrual symptoms, which I had never really noticed a lot before because I was on birth control for so many years. Which I'd only stopped taking once I was tracking my basal body temperature to prevent pregnancy instead. Sorry about that. The battery died, so I had to change it. Also, if the picture looks a little bit different, that's why. Okay, so getting back to my symptoms. So I also wrote that I had cold symptoms, a stuffy nose, and sinus pain, some cramps, tightness, and twinges, which I wrote sometimes suddenly out of nowhere, which I remember. And it wasn't a lot. It was just something that was noticeable, especially the ones that would happen out of nowhere. That was not common for me. Fatigue. I definitely remember being more tired than usual, but again, you know, it was something that I didn't know for sure was to be contributed to pregnancy, because just given, you know, everything that was going on in the world at the time and is unfortunately still going on, you know, I think it's to be expected that I might be tired, but it was just more so than usual. It was noticeable, so I made note of it. Same thing with hunger. Again, I think sometimes stress can cause more hunger, but it was also noticeable just despite me trying not to read too much into symptoms. So I did write that down. Some vivid dreams, sometimes just weird or scary. And then the three things that I will say were that stood out the most were sensitive gums, because my gums are never sensitive, and flushed skin, which, like, it was mostly like my cheeks that you could see it. It was just like this part of my cheeks were super red. Not my whole face, but it was just like right along my cheekbones. But it was my whole face that felt red, and like my chest and my back and a little bit my arms. And I just remember like Googling whether or not that was a symptom, and I think I got some, it was like not like a surefire sign, but like I'd seen like some other people mention it, so it was kind of like inconclusive, so not very helpful, but it was something that was just, it really stood out to me. It was so weird because I had not been out in the sun. The only part of my skin that actually was red was just like a little bit along the cheekbones, and I just felt so sunburned. And then the last thing was just feeling a little off, and that's exactly how I phrased it, and I remember what I'm referring to, and I'd heard other people say that same thing or something similar, that they had experienced during their 2-week wait symptoms of a successful cycle. And also some people say that they didn't notice anything at all. Like, they had no idea they were pregnant. But the ones who have said that they felt off, and that's like the only way to describe it, like, now looking back and having been through it, I understand what they mean when they say that, because there really is no other way to explain it. Like, I just felt off, like, just not myself. And I remember we went away for the weekend, because my parents have a cabin, and we went to visit them, but we stayed at a resort nearby. When we checked in, one of the first things I did after we got settled in was take a shower in the nice big spa-like bathroom. And I remember standing there thinking, just like, I felt different. Like, I was trying to suppress and like not focus on any symptoms, because I didn't want to kind of make things up in my head as it appears, as I did the cycle before. But I think somewhere deep down I knew that it was different at that time. It was just something about how I felt in the moment, and you know, the things that stood out that I couldn't ignore, the ones that I just talked about, like the flushed skin and the sensitive gums. Like, it was just, I don't know, there was something about how I felt, and I think it was just because somehow I knew. But again, even though I knew that, like, looking back on it now, like, I can admit to myself that I think I did, but I was trying not to admit that to myself, because I just didn't want to get my hopes up to be so let down again, because the farther you have to fall, the worse it is. So, yeah. So I think that wraps up my 2-week wait symptoms. So if you have any questions or comments, leave them below. And yeah, I guess that wraps it up, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.